For nearly half a century, the world stood on the edge of an abyss. The Cold War, a war of ideologies, threats, and proxy conflicts, gripped the globe. But what if it had escalated into a full-scale hot war? What if the threat of nuclear annihilation became a horrifying reality? This is the story of how the Cold War could have turned into the ultimate global catastrophe. The Cold War began after World War II, with the United States and the Soviet Union as the world's superpowers. The West, led by the US, espoused capitalism and democracy, while the East, under the Soviet Union, championed communism. This ideological battle didn't play out on open battlefields, but in the shadows, through espionage, political manipulation, and proxy wars. Interviews with experts. Historians and political scientists explain the nature of the Cold War, highlighting the major events like the Berlin Crisis, Korean War, and Vietnam War, which were fought indirectly between the superpowers. The nuclear threat, the doomsday clock. By the 1960s, the Cold War had become a race for nuclear superiority. The threat of a nuclear war became a constant fear, with both the US and the Soviet Union amassing vast arsenals of weapons capable of obliterating the planet. The world was forever on the brink, with the famous doomsday clock symbolizing how close humanity was to self-destruction. Expert interview. A historian explains the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, MAD, where both sides knew that any nuclear attack would result in the complete destruction of both nations, deterring direct conflict, but also creating the potential for disaster. A recreation of the Cuban Missile Crisis, the closest the world came to nuclear war, showing Kennedy and Khrushchev intense negotiations. Flashpoints. The moment war could have erupted. While direct confrontation was avoided, the Cold War had numerous flashpoints where war could have easily ignited. What if the Cuban Missile Crisis had gone differently? Or if the Soviets had escalated in Berlin? What if the Vietnam War had expanded into full-scale conflict between the US and the Soviet Union? Interviews with experts. Military analysts discuss the key flashpoints and the events that could have triggered a hot war. Cuba, 1962. A dramatization of what could have happened if the US had attacked Cuba after discovering Soviet missiles. Berlin, 1961. A recreation of the tense moments when Soviet tanks faced off against American tanks in Berlin, nearly starting World War III. Vietnam, 1965 to 1975. A reenactment of the Vietnam War's expansion, showing the possibility of Soviet involvement if the conflict had escalated. The first strikes. What happens when war breaks out? If the Cold War had turned hot, the first strike would likely have been nuclear. Both superpowers had the capability to launch thousands of warheads, targeting military sites and major population centers. The devastation would be unimaginable. Expert interview. A military strategist explains the logistical challenges and strategy behind a nuclear war, including the concept of nuclear fallout, strategic bombing, and global famine. Dramatic visuals of missile silos launching, a massive nuclear exchange between the US and the USSR, and the catastrophic effects on major cities like New York, Moscow, and London. The aftermath. Surviving the nuclear apocalypse. If a nuclear war had occurred, the immediate death toll would have been catastrophic. But the long-term consequences would have been even worse. The world would have faced not just the physical devastation of cities, but the collapse of economies, governments, and societies. What would the world look like in the aftermath of a nuclear apocalypse? Expert interview. A nuclear survival expert discusses the realities of living in a post-apocalyptic world. Nuclear winter, the breakdown of civilization, and the collapse of infrastructure. The global impact, a world forever changed. The long-term impact of a hot war would have reshaped the world. Superpowers may have fallen, but the geopolitical landscape would still be redefined. How would the surviving nations handle the fallout? Would any alliances survive? And could humanity ever fully recover from such devastation? Expert interviews. International relations experts discuss the possible reshaping of world politics post-war. Could China have risen as a global superpower in the vacuum left by the US and the Soviet Union? What would be the future of Europe, Asia, and the Middle East? The Cold War never turned into full-scale warfare, but it was a close call. The threat of a hot war loomed over the world for decades, and its potential consequences are still felt today. The lessons of the Cold War remain relevant as the world continues to grapple with nuclear weapons, global tensions, and the search for peace. The Cold War may have ended, but the dangers of global conflict persist. We must never forget the lessons learned from the past. This documentary was created to explore the alternate history of a world forever changed by the potential of a hot Cold War. Special thanks to all historians, experts, and actors who brought this story to life.